Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul-led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. And if you're a longtime listener, welcome back. I'm so thrilled that you're all here with me. In this episode, we are focusing on the human end of the leash. If you've ever found yourself lying awake at night, worrying about your dog, feeling like you're not doing enough, or carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders because you care so deeply, you're not alone. Today, I'm talking with Jennifer Blough, a licensed professional counselor, author, and the host of the Compassion Fatigue podcast. Jen knows firsthand what it means to give your heart to animals and to the causes that you believe in. And she also knows the cost of caring when we don't tend to our own hearts. Jen and I explore compassion fatigue, what it is, how it shows up, and why so many of us who love animals and advocate for change struggle with it. Jen shares her own story of activism, trauma, and healing. And we talk about the guilt that can creep in when we feel like we should be doing more, as well as the difference between pain and suffering, and the small but powerful ways that we can begin to reclaim balance. This is such an important conversation for all of us who want to keep showing up for our dogs, our communities, and our planet without actually losing ourselves in the process. We also talk about the need for community, and so I wanted to mention a free resource for you to help you with that. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting advice about what's best for your dog, or worried that you'll get it wrong even when you're trying so hard, again, you're not alone. That's exactly why Stacy Renfrey and I created Fetch First Light, our private Facebook group just for dog mamas like you. It's not another noisy group. It's a sanctuary where you can exhale, ask questions, and connect with guardians walking the same soul-led path. Inside, you'll get gentle guidance through the Fetch framework, conversations that honor both science and intuition, and tools to help you feel more confident and less alone. So if you've been craving support, clarity, and connection as you care for your dog, I'd love to invite you to join us in Fetch First Light. It's the place where holistic dog care finally feels lighter, not heavier. Okay, on that note, let's go. Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for joining me on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast today. I've really been looking forward to talking to you for the past several weeks, actually.
Oh, me too. Thank you so much, Alexia. I am so looking forward to this conversation.
I think this is going to be a really powerful conversation for people. And to give listeners a bit of a background, you and I connected through the miracles of social media. And and you had shared that you have a podcast and you do work around compassion fatigue. And I looked into this and was like, oh my gosh, I need her to come and talk to my audience because I think it's a topic that not a lot of people will necessarily know about. They may or may not have heard of the term. Once we describe what it is, they may or may not have recognized it in other people. But then it's when we get to reflect that back on ourselves and look at where we might be experiencing that too, and how it's a beautiful call for self-love and self-care as well. So, and I feel like so many of the Mystic Dog Mama listeners they're just such heart-filled people, and they care so much about everyone else, all the animals, their dogs. And this is an invitation to reflect that love back on themselves and support them in doing that. So I'm really, really grateful that you are open to coming and talking to us today about this.
Absolutely. And you nailed it. Therein lies the problem, the word care, right? So Charles Figley, who's, essentially the godfather of compassion fatigue, he calls this the cost of caring, right? And so it's just this, and we'll get into definitions and symptoms and all of that, but compassion fatigue really is a normal consequence of caring so much to the point that it can almost hurt.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So how did you even become aware of compassion fatigue as an identifiable thing?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I struggled with compassion fatigue for decades before I even heard the term. So I guess I'll just kind of go back in time here. So I first became involved in animal activism probably when I was about 10, 11, 12. I stopped eating certain ingredients. So for example, once I found out what was actually in a hamburger, I was like, what? And so, I'm not eating this anymore. And then my grandmother, she was so progressive and she was an animal rights activist. And so I learned so much from her. I learned all about animal rescue from her, went to my very first shelter with her, went to my very first protest with her, and it was so empowering. But as you get older and you kind of go off into the real world, you kind of leave the sheltered life of being a kid and a teenager. That's when I really started to kind of see more. And so I got further into animal activism. I started working at an animal shelter. And, I started to develop just severe depression and almost like PTSD symptoms. I was just anxious and depressed all the time. And I thought, well, I do have a history of depression. And I thought, well, this is just my depression kind of rearing its ugly head. And, I guess maybe I'm not cut out for this field. And, I'm weak. This is a character flaw on and on and on, just kind of beating myself up because we weren't talking about our feelings back then. I mean, I was very, very close with my colleagues, but none of us were talking about what was really going on. We talked about how pissed off we were. We talked about, it was kind of an externalized thing. We talked about, oh, people are cruel and this and that, but we never really were talking about our own mental health and struggles. And so I left the shelter after a while, but I was being pulled back. And so I eventually became certified in cruelty investigations and went back and became an animal control officer. And you want to talk about trauma. And so here we go again. The depression's coming back, the PTSD like symptoms are coming back. And I eventually burned out and still had no idea, again, thought this was all me. I am not cut out for this work. Well, what I had found that I was good at out in the field was actually helping people. And I was almost like, you wear so many different hats as an ACO. And so one of those hats was like counseling people in the field. And I found that I had this talent for it. So I thought, you know what? Why don't I go back to graduate school and I'm going to study psychology? Because at the same time, I had lost my soulmate, my little parrot, Albert, just absolute love of my life. And I thought, I'm going to go back and I'm going to become a counselor and I'm going to specialize in pet loss. And I'm going to become the kind of person that people like me can come to for help. Well, we're in class one day and the professor says, okay, I want to talk to you guys about something that therapists are very vulnerable to, and that is compassion fatigue. And as he's talking about it, I like light bulbs are just going off all over the place. And you want to talk about validation. I finally had a name for what I had been struggling with for 20 years. And and right then and there, it became my mission. I said, you know what? And in addition to pet loss, I am going to work with people around compassion fatigue, animal related compassion fatigue specifically, because we hear so much about, nurses can struggle with this, therapists can struggle with this, police officers, firefighters, but no one's really, I mean, we're starting to, but back then people weren't talking about, oh yeah, and people who work with and care for animals can be, extremely vulnerable to this. And so, kind of long story long, ever since then, I've really just kind of dedicated my life to coming on podcasts and writing books and, having my own podcast and basically just screaming off the rooftops to anyone who will listen about compassion fatigue.
Well, I'm very grateful that you're doing that, to be honest, because I think it's so important. And like we were just briefly talking about before we started recording, I think it's easier for people to see compassion fatigue in professionals. They can say, I can understand how a nurse could feel that. I can understand how a police officer or a therapist can feel that. But that's not me. I'm just taking care of my dog. Almost as if you don't deserve that you haven't gone through the kind of like the trenches in the same sort of way. But I would argue, and I'm sure that you would argue that that's actually quite false, that anyone can be experiencing compassion fatigue.
Absolutely. So, let's break it down a little bit, right? So, first of all, there's this word compassion. Okay? So, if you don't have compassion, you're not going to develop compassion fatigue. So that's kind of the critical component is having compassion. So the definition of compassion fatigue, at least right now, the thinking is that it is a combination of two things. So we have secondary traumatic stress, and I can break that down a little bit. And then we have burnout, and I can also break that down a little bit. And so those two components, when you're struggling with both of those things, that can result in compassion fatigue. Now, when I talk about compassion fatigue, please know, at least at the time of this recording, so here we are in 2025, this is not considered a diagnosable mental disorder. So this is not like a clinical depression or an anxiety disorder or PTSD. You cannot be diagnosed professionally with compassion fatigue. So right now it's just kind of a syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. And so if it's okay with you, I'll kind of break down those
Please,
two components for your audience. Okay.
please.
So a lot of people, when they think about trauma, they think about primary trauma. So that's something that has happened directly to us, right? So I was bit by a dog. That's primary trauma. I was sexually assaulted. That's primary trauma. I was involved in a natural disaster. That's primary trauma. Now, again, trauma is subjective, right? So some people might get bit by a dog and it wasn't traumatizing, where others, it's a form of trauma. So we first have to realize that trauma falls on a spectrum. It is very personal. It's very subjective. So I don't want people to dismiss an experience they had and say, well, others had it worse, so I can't call my experience trauma. Well, you can. And if it feels like trauma, it's trauma. Secondary trauma is trauma that you witness or experience secondhand. So, for example, a therapist is constantly absorbing stories of other people's trauma. A firefighter or police officer is constantly being exposed to people dying, people being burned, people being shot, people being in car accidents. It's not their trauma, they are experiencing it secondhand. Well, what we've come to realize is the brain does not differentiate. The brain can feel that trauma as if it is your own, right? So now let's take the animal part. So despite what people think that veterinarians and shelter workers and rescue volunteers, they just play with puppies and kitties all day, that could be further from the truth. There is so much suffering that we witness almost on a day-to-day basis that is a form of secondary trauma. And if we experience that trauma over and over and over again, we now consider that secondary traumatic stress, and it's similar to the symptoms of PTSD. Now, I know a lot of your listeners, maybe some of them work in the field, maybe some of them volunteer, maybe some foster, but I'm sure a lot of them have their own special needs companion animals. So, special needs this could be medical, this could be behavioral, this could be so maybe you have or you foster senior dogs, and so maybe you're doing a lot of hospice care. So you're witnessing day after day after day your animal in pain, suffering. And even if this is a behavioral issue, we know that dogs with behavioral issues, they're struggling. right? So you may not be witnessing them being traumatized, but you're witnessing them suffering. Okay, so that's the secondary traumatic stress part. The burnout part has more to do with our environment and specifically how we react or interact with that environment. Okay, so I'll use caregivers and foster parents for this example. So this could be just the too much and not enough, right? So too much caregiving responsibilities, too much financial responsibilities, too many vet appointments, too many, behaviorist appointments, and not enough. Maybe not enough money, not enough time, not enough support from other people who really understand this, right? And so when you have both the burnout combined with the secondary traumatic stress, now you have compassion fatigue. And again, it's the cost of caring, and we have, let's throw in some grief, so when we have special needs animals, there can be a lot of what we call anticipatory grief. So, for example, I am going to be picking up a medical foster dog this afternoon. Hoping it's gonna be a foster failure, but we'll see. And it's a little 10-year-old Pomeranian mix who's had a real, rough life. It's his teeth are rotting, falling out of his head. We think he has collapsing trachea, and so he has a lot of medical issues. And I know that he's going to be fragile, and his life is most likely going to be shorter. And so there's this kind of background of grief that's just kind of simmering in the background, like this knowing that I'm going to pour my heart and soul into this animal, and it's going to take a lot of time and emotional energy and physical energy and spiritual energy, and his life on earth might be cut short. And so we can deal with, I mean, I guess there's just so many things, and I could go on and on, but I'll let you kind of,
No, this is
take over.
fantastic. This is fantastic because I was going to ask you too what the relationship that you feel might be between grief and compassion fatigue and almost like the blurring of those lines and how that becomes such a complex emotional experience. And I think it's true whether you are going down like the more serious route of taking on fosters that have serious problems, or you're just dealing with, I mean, everything that you've described to a degree, I can relate to with my own journey with my dog Lucky and the health challenges that he's faced and the behavioral challenges that he's faced. And then also, and I wondered if this is any part of it, guilt,
Oh, it's
guilt
a
that
huge
I carry.
part.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, it is a huge part. So inappropriate or excessive guilt is one of the symptoms of compassion fatigue, for sure. There's this guilt of I could be doing more. Am I doing the right thing? Just constantly kind of questioning ourselves, especially when it comes time for us to, have to say goodbye, whether that's through, you know, um, euthanasia or natural means. There's always going to be this guilt. Did I make the right decision? What if I had done that? I should have done that. I could have done that. It is such a normal human response. And so again, I don't want to I'm not here to pathologize people, right? So I have my own kind of dilemma with the whole medical model that therapists have to follow because of insurance, and then the compassion fatigue, right? So again, compassion fatigue is not a diagnosable disorder, and we shouldn't be pathologizing people who are having a very normal human reaction to an abnormal set of circumstances,
Yeah. Well,
and kind of an ongoing trauma, an ongoing stress, an ongoing grief. If you're human and you have a soul and a heart, which all of your listeners do, it's going to affect you, but it can affect it. This is not like a life sentence. right? I care, therefore I'm going to get compassion fatigue.
Mm.
And I know we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the progression of compassion fatigue, but we're also going to talk about like, okay, there are ways that you can minimize this,
Mm.
right? So I learned from another kind of godfather of compassion fatigue named Dr. Eric Gentry. And I did a training with him and he said something to me that just it's so simple yet it was really profound for me and really put things into perspective. And that is there's a difference between pain and suffering. And I didn't quite understand at first. And then as I got to talking to him, he made me realize that when you're in this work, and by work I mean whether it's you're a therapist, you're you know, a veterinarian or a pet parent caring for a special needs animal, it's going to hurt. Period. There's nothing I can't come on this podcast. I can't write a book. There are no words that I can say to take the pain away. But there are some things that we can do to prevent the suffering. So pain is something that you feel. You might feel it every day. You might feel it multiple times a day, but you're able to, because of resilience, you're able to feel the pain and then move on from the pain. Suffering is being stuck in the pain 24/7.
Would you
And that
say
that just yeah,
so?
sorry, that just made a huge difference for
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
So,
Well, because I think that I'm so glad that you brought that up because I think like other traditions talk about suffering as like a choice. And
yeah.
I think people can find that really triggering and difficult with, but I'm not choosing this experience. I don't want this experience. And I know we could even go even sort of metaphysical with that, like the various levels of who's doing the choosing, right? But in
Yeah,
terms of
yeah.
like the human experiencing it, how then would you really differentiate for somebody to be able to know if I'm in a situation where every day presents pain, how do I not be in a place of suffering then?
Yeah, so I kind of compare it to my own struggles with depression, kind of outside of compassion fatigue. This is something that, so I'm not the type of person who, I was on an antidepressant for a year. I went to therapy for a year, kind of figured things out, and now my depression is, quote unquote cured or in remission. If you are going to do this type of work or you are going to have these type of dogs and have this type of caregiving responsibility, you I don't think you can take your mental health for granted. It's something that for me, I have to work on my mental health constantly. It is like a full-time job. It's what I imagine if you had maybe some type of chronic disease. So I have chronic pain, for example, and that is something I have to work on every single day. I can't just take for granted that I have a normal body and I can't take for granted that I have a normal brain because I don't. Right. And so, yeah, I don't like the phrase that suffering is a choice because I think that brings on a lot of guilt and shame. And so I like, there's a difference between the pain and suffering because for so long I didn't I didn't realize there was a difference. I thought suffering was it. And I thought, why can't I get rid of the pain? Because you can't. But I was able to find a way out of being stuck in the pain. I was able to find little moments of joy. And for me, that was, that was a huge improvement. If I could find a half an hour of joy every day, that was a significant improvement.
Yeah.
Not wanting to take my life,
Right.
that's a significant improvement. So I just, when I give presentations and go on podcasts, I'm very, very transparent and real and raw about this. I don't want to say, well, you just change your thoughts to more positive thoughts and you cure your compassion fatigue. I That's not it. At least for me, and a lot of people I've worked with, that it's not that simple. It's not that simple. You got to have this like fully stocked toolbox of all these different things in order to just try to keep yourself treading water rather than drowning, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%,
Yeah.
100%. Thank you for clarifying that. I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really helpful. And so I think it might be helpful for people to hear what are some of the kind of common symptoms and maybe the even less common symptoms of compassion fatigue that they might be able to start looking at, see, am I perhaps actually dealing with this? And like we were saying, it's not about pathologizing, but when you have a label to a thing,
Yeah.
it does exactly how you were describing for yourself of like, it's not me. This is a thing. It's not that I'm inherently flawed and I can't cope. This is a natural byproduct of being a really caring human. So when I can sort of externalize that in a sense, I can then do something about it rather
Yeah.
than soaking my whole identity with that, right? So, what are some of the things that people might see and maybe don't necessarily recognize are compassion fatigue?
Yeah, so the symptoms are pretty extensive. So I'll just kind of touch on a
Okay.
few that I think are pretty important. And I also want to preface this by saying, it is possible to have compassion fatigue and clinical depression. It's possible
Mhm.
to have compassion fatigue and PTSD. So if you're really struggling, I would encourage people to, reach out to a therapist, a mental health professional, and see if there are some other things going on there. Because so many of the symptoms of compassion fatigue overlap with clinical depression. They can overlap with general anxiety disorder or PTSD, right? So some of the symptoms can include feelings feelings of sadness and depression. This could look like feeling hopeless, feeling helpless. We talked about the guilt, right? So there could be this inappropriate or excessive guilt. We can even struggle with low self-esteem, right? Because we're beating ourselves up. I shouldn't be depressed. I shouldn't be feeling this way. My dog has it so much worse. Why? There's other people, other animals out there that have it so much worse. I'm not worthy of feeling this way. So there's a lot of guilt there. There's a lot of shame, and that can wreak havoc on your self-confidence, right? And so we can have some anxiety type symptoms. So this could be physical, right? So racing heart, shallow breathing, kind of like trembling, tense muscles all the time. It could also be a mental anxiety. So constantly worrying, right? Especially if you have a special needs animal, you could be constantly worrying about the behavioral issues or the medical issues. And so there's this constant kind of anxiety. It can look like intrusive thoughts. So this is something that I really have to manage even today, right? I have to actively manage these things. So your head hits the pillow and you just start ruminating, or you have these intrusive thoughts about suffering, and it's difficult to sleep, and so you might be struggling with sleep, right? You might find it hard to fall asleep or stay asleep because you're constantly worrying, and you're tense, and your body is just, it's almost it is probably in a state of fight or flight, and so you're just like ramped up and ready to go. You're So we call it hypervigilance, which is like this sense of I have to be ready to respond immediately. So if something goes, I hear a cough from my dog, right? I'm like going to spring out of bed. And so you never allow yourself to like really relax. And that can be a classic symptom of compassion fatigue. We can be irritable and angry, um, just really impatient with people. We might not even want to be around people. We might start isolating. We might start even pulling back because we don't like the person we've become, right? I remember when I was just angry all the time, and I'm like, I don't even want to be around myself. Who wants to be
Right.
around me? And other people don't get it. So I'm just going to pull back. So now you're dealing with isolation and loneliness, which actually is a cause of compassion fatigue. So now you're in this cycle, right? there can even be like some spiritual symptoms. So maybe you've just lost your faith in God or other higher power. You're questioning the meaning of it all. You're questioning your purpose. So we can have like this, I used to be in just a constant existential crisis. Now I just have many existential issues, but before it was chronic, right? And so yeah, I mean, I could go on. There's a lot of symptoms, avoidance, and again, a lot of these sound like PTSD, right? Avoiding the trauma. So yeah, again, you can Google compassion fatigue, or I know you're gonna have my website. I'm sure in the show links, I have a lot of information on the symptoms of compassion fatigue, the causes of compassion fatigue. So
That's really helpful. Thank you.
yeah,
But I think that helps to paint a picture of the various ways that
yeah,
you might experience it. And I love that you said too that there's such an overlap with various other mental health conditions as well. And so
yeah.
it's that's also an invitation perhaps to talk to your healthcare professional as well of like on top of my anxiety, I think some of it might be in part related to compassion fatigue. Can we talk about my experience of taking care of my dog? You know, those sorts of things. It gives you more to be able to get the appropriate support that you need to deal with this and to come through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the years that I was in therapy, no one ever brought that up.
Hmm.
And neither did I. And because again, I didn't know it was a thing. And so, if you are in therapy and your therapist gets really squeamish or changes the subject, well, then perhaps you need a different therapist, or maybe you need like a compassion fatigue coach kind of on the side. So, okay, when I'm with my therapist, I'm talking about my anxiety disorder, and we're really digging deep into childhood stuff and this and that. But then I go to my coach, or maybe you're in a kind of like a support group. There, I can really process the animal caregiving part of it
Hmm.
and get some validation and some support there. And if you're new to therapy and you think that this might be helpful, you have every right to ask the therapist before you ever see them. Look, here's what I'm going through. I'm dealing with compassion fatigue, and it has to do with I am a pet parent, or I am a foster parent, and I have a dog who is, A, B, and C. Is that something you feel comfortable with? If they dismiss you or say, well, you can't get compassion fatigue as a pet parent, goodbye. Just move on. So you have every right to kind of screen the therapist to make sure that he or she is going to validate that experience for you.
Oh, that's such an important point because we talk about on this podcast doing that one creating a team for your dog for various cares and also vetting that team, so how to have better conversations with vets to see, is this the right vet for me? Does this person practice in a way that aligns with how I see caring for my dog, etc. But I think we often forget that we also need that kind of a team, and we can also vet the professionals that are helping to support us, and trusting our own guts, which I think is also part of the journey that our dogs are inviting us into in terms of mirroring and standing up for ourselves and recognizing our own worth and value and advocating for ourselves as much as we advocate for our dogs, because we're very good at advocating for our animals. We will do anything and everything for them, but we sometimes put ourselves on the back burner. And so this is an invitation to actually switch that up and say, hold on, I need some help, and I have every right to choose what the best type of support is for me in this moment with all of this. So thank you
Yeah,
for bringing that up.
absolutely. Because I mean, one of the causes we talked about, being isolated, not having a support system can be a contributor to compassion fatigue, right? And not having kind of people who get it, or people to validate us
Mhm.
can be another contributor. But another cause, another risk factor, is what we call other directed, right? So I'm other directed. I'll be perfectly honest. I don't have human children, but I'm all about like caring for my fur babies, my feather babies, my clients, my husband, my friend. Everyone comes first. And then there's a crumb left, Jen can have it. Well, so that's definitely kind of a mindset shift that I had to learn. I
Mhm.
wouldn't say I've totally embraced it yet, but I'm trying. But that's something that I had to learn was I have to be part of this equation too, because if I'm not at my best, I'm not going to be a great caregiver. And that scares me, the thought of not being able to be a great caregiver. And so I reluctantly started taking better care of myself because I've got to be at the top of my game.
Right.
Right. So as a therapist, it's actually in their code of ethics. You must practice self-care. It's an ethical responsibility
Oh,
because if you are struggling, you're not going to be as effective therapist. You can only take your clients as far as you've gone, as far as healing. So we almost have to be the same way. It's an ethical responsibility for us to take care of ourselves if we want to be the best caregiver we can be. And I know your entire audience, that's what they want.
100%. Oh, that's
Yeah.
powerful.
That is their
That's
purpose. That is
yeah.
their meaning. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's so powerful that it is an ethical responsibility. That really changes things, doesn't it, when you put it into that kind of
It
language?
does. It does. Yeah. It changed everything for me. Knowing that A, it's an ethical responsibility, and B, managing compassion fatigue means I'm not ignoring the pain. I'm not putting my head in the sand because I feel the pain all the time. But I don't have to suffer because if I'm suffering, I'm not going to make a great pet parent or caregiver. I'm not.
That's that reminds me of what a lot of wisdom traditions talk about in terms of being very present with whatever
Yeah.
is coming up and that sense of whatever. Matt Kahn is a teacher who writes and speaks about this, that whatever arises, love that. And that doesn't mean you have to like it. This isn't about a judgment of I prefer this, I don't prefer this. It's being able to work that muscle of allowing things to come up and to your point around suffering, not holding on to it, not staying stuck in whatever is passing through you, but you become a witness to it and an observer of it rather than latching on and not being able to let go and not being able to get out of it. And I think it's a hard lesson to learn and it's a difficult sort of spiritual gym experience to go through because it requires a lot of undoing as well of what we think we are here to do and our identity that gets so mixed up in everything and also the preferences. Like obviously we don't prefer suffering. I don't like to see a lot of what's going on in the world. But it's not about condoning it and saying that's okay. It's about exactly like you're saying, if I'm meant to make any kind of a difference, I have to make sure that all of that stuff is not absolutely crushing me. Because if it crushes me, I can't do anything about it. So, how can I
Exactly.
show up and be present with it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think just a couple other points that I think at least have helped me. So the first one is you are your own tool, essentially, right? I mean, yes, we have different kind of things that we different tools that we use, but ultimately, when it comes to caregiving, you are the main tool,
Mhm.
right? And so you have to take care of that tool. You can't let the tool get rusty and the handle falls off and because then the tool is not going to be as effective. So you have to care for yourself as the main tool in your caregiving work. And the second thing is that someone once said to, well, it was my mom said this to me. I visited my parents one day a few years ago and I was just sobbing because I had read earlier an article about the abuse of elephants in the tourism industry in certain countries. And I was hysterical by the time I got to my parents. And my mom said something to me. She says, your suffering doesn't change anything. I was like, What? It's almost like I had this magical thinking that if I did suffer, I could almost take some of that pain away from the elephants. I know it is completely irrational, but when we're in that state of compassion fatigue and with a dysregulated nervous system, we can't think rationally. Our prefrontal cortex just goes offline, and we're reacting with pure emotion.
Mhm.
And so I used to think, and again, rationally, I knew this wasn't true, but if I am in pain and suffering, that's where I'm supposed to be because I'm somehow absorbing others' pain. But I wasn't. I was just feeling pain. I was just suffering. And if I'm going to suffer, how am I going to care for my own animals? How am I going to show up for other people who are caring for animals? I can't. And so that was a really, really hard pill to swallow that I could be at a party having a blast, or I could be off in a corner crying. None of it changes the reality for that animal.
Right.
But the stronger, and I don't like the word stronger, the more resilient I can be, the more I'm managing my own compassion fatigue, the better advocate I can be because I have more energy. My passion has come back because we can lose our passion altogether
Mm-hmm.
with compassion fatigue. And that's a very severe symptom. That is one of the saddest symptoms of compassion fatigue is losing that passion that you
Mm-hmm.
once had.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are even sorry,
Yeah.
there are
Yeah.
even people, you know, we lost someone fairly recently in the animal welfare community to suicide. And it's not the first time and it's not going to be the last time. And so that is an extreme symptom of compassion fatigue and one that needs professional mental help immediately.
Yeah. No,
You
absolutely.
never want to get to that point.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
and I agree with you, and I agree with your mom about how your suffering doesn't change anything. But and this isn't about positive thinking and it's not about denying our experiences, but I do think that there's also real power in remembering as well that our energy is what shifts things. And that when we can serve as the light in the world, when we can come into our own light, that in and of itself has a ripple effect of change. And so
Absolutely.
even if you can't actually go and change things in person for those elephants in another country, you can ripple change from where you are right now. And when we talk about even like at a quantum level about entanglement, everything is connected. And so you can impact at that kind of a level too. And I think in those moments when you're feeling so overwhelmed by everything that's going on in the world, and it can make you feel powerless and hopeless and all that, and then spiral, if we can remember that just as showing up and like having a smile for somebody we pass on the street, for example, or smiling at your dog, or shifting your energy, not denying your experiences, but reclaiming your own light, that is so, so powerful. And arguably, like one of the most powerful things that you can actually do, particularly in those periods where you feel like there's nothing I can do in the physical world. That's something nobody can take away from you. And I think it's an important reminder.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that change, positive change is slow.
Yeah.
Negative change is, as we're seeing, is immediate, very fast. Positive, real change is slow. But here's the thing, you know, I go back to, I don't know, it must have been 1985, 86, 87, something like that. And this is the first protest with my grandma, and we were protesting General Motors because they were using live animals in crash tests. And they've stopped. Now, did I make that happen? No. But was I part of that? Yes, I was a part of that. Every petition you sign, every animal you adopt, every small action makes a difference.
Hmm.
And so I think we have to remember that because it can be so hard. You pour your heart into soul, your in soul into this, and you don't see the change.
Right.
right? You don't see the change. But what we have to kind of remember is that things eventually do change. We might see that change a year from now. We might see it 10 years from now. It might happen when we're not even on this planet anymore. But we have been a part of that change. And you don't have to work full time as an animal control officer or in a shelter. What you are doing, simply loving and caring for your animal, especially if it's a special needs animal, you are making a huge difference. I once had a t shirt that said something to the effect of, to the world, you are just one person. To your dog, you are the world.
And it's so true.
It's so true.
Hmm.
We just have to remember that in the tough
Yeah,
times. Yeah.
absolutely. No, thank you for bringing that up. I'm wondering if we can touch on briefly this sort of cycle of compassion fatigue, because you've talked about there being
Yeah.
sort of stages. What does that look like for people?
Yeah, this is something I wish I had learned a long time ago, because I think I could have broken the cycle, right?
Mm,
Instead of letting it get to kind of the end, which is kind of like the most devastating part of the cycle. Well, it can be. So I think, all your listeners are probably going to resonate with this first stage. And it is called, I don't love the title, but it's called the zealot phase. And it's like a honeymoon phase, right? We're full of passion, we're full of energy, full of idealism. We're going to save the world, right? And so you pour everything you have, you overextend yourself probably, because you are on a mission. You are on a mission to make a difference, the biggest difference you can, right? The problem here is that when you're in this phase, boundaries don't matter, self-care doesn't matter, right? So we start neglecting ourselves because who cares? We're full of energy, right? We can do this. The problem is after a while, just like an actual relationship, the honeymoon phase eventually ends and reality kicks in, right? So when reality sets in, we can start to feel a little cynical, a little frustrated with things, a little bit resentful. We might start seeing other people as like lazy or uncaring or even annoying, right? We we're still at that stage where we look at people who are really advanced and they seem like zombies. So we're like, what's wrong with you? And then we look at the newbies who are just like, yay, I could save the world. And we're like, you're just annoying. Right. So we're in this weird kind of middle phase here. So if we don't start to set boundaries and take care of ourselves in this phase, you're likely going to move into what we call the withdrawal phase. And this is where we start kind of pulling away, even if we're pulling away emotionally, right? So we're still physically present, but we're starting to pull away emotionally. Or we actually might start to avoid people, places, situations that are causing us pain, right? We might stop engaging in things we used to enjoy because we just don't get pleasure out of them anymore, right? So why bother? We might even at the stage like start to begin to use some unhealthy coping skills. This can look like drugs or alcohol, any other kind of like addiction, just things that feel good in the short term and they numb us out or they help us escape, but they're really detrimental in the long term. So again, we have another chance to break the cycle. But if we don't, then we can progress into what we call the zombie phase. And this is when you're just on autopilot. You're just going through the motions. There's no passion there. There's no emotion there. You're just exhausted. You're running on empty. You're kind of emotionally checked out. You're almost detached from animals, from people. You feel disconnected from that original mission, that original passion that you once had. And because of that, you might feel hopeless or just this despair might start to kind of creep in. Again, have the chance to break the cycle. But if you don't, then we kind of come to a fork in the road. So if this progresses all the way to this point, you basically have a choice now. is called pathology versus maturation. And this has mostly, of course, been studied in animal welfare workers, but I think we can really apply this to caregiving across the board, right? So if we decide, not decide, if we end up going into pathology, now we can start to actually develop symptoms of, or even actual mental health disorders, clinical depression, anxiety disorder, PTSD, right? We can have some unresolved trauma and grief. So if we've been stuffing everything down this whole time and we just keep progressing through the stages, we got a lot of unresolved stuff going on. Like I said, we can have suicidal thoughts, right? If you are feeling that hopeless and have that much despair, some people can struggle with this. You might even leave the field. You might stop fostering. You might say to yourself, this is the last special needs animal I'm ever going to have. I'm never doing this again. It hurts too much, right? Or, and I'm not saying this is the easy road, we can go into what's called maturation. We have done the work. We've processed the grief. We've processed the trauma. We've really embraced self-care and boundaries, and we're developing this deeper awareness. And we've done the work to start healing. Now we're starting to feel the pain without the suffering, right? And when we start to do that, we find that our sense of purpose starts to slowly come back. Again, you're still feeling the pain. This is still going to hurt. But that passion is coming back, that mission, our meaning is starting to come back to us. And then at that point, it just becomes an ongoing effort, right? You can't say, I'm cured. I'm going to go back to the zealot phase. No, 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 no. At this point, it's got to be self-care is non-negotiable. Boundaries are non-negotiable. And, again, it's not going to stop the hurt, but it can do a great deal to help with the suffering.
Oh, that's really helpful. What
Yeah.
do you think has been maybe from your personal experience as well as working with other people, what do you feel are some of the perhaps self-care tools that have been most useful for people to deal with compassion fatigue and also to sort of recognize, like you were saying, oh, I'm at this stage, I need to interrupt that. What are some
Yeah.
useful techniques that maybe help people along with that? And just even, I think like something like setting boundaries is something we all need to be better at. So this isn't just applicable in this particular case, but I think this is like healthy self-care practices. But what do you feel has been particularly helpful for you and for others that you've supported with us?
Yeah, researchers have kind of figured out there's a variety of things that can really help with compassion fatigue, and again, the secondary traumatic stress portion and the burnout portion. So one of the things definitely is boundaries, right? So if you are someone who identifies as being other directed, you're always focusing on everything else. You have to set boundaries, and it's not easy. I am not going to lie. Setting boundaries is not easy, especially if you've never really learned how, right? And so, but the thing is when you say no to something, you say yes to something else. So if you say, no, I cannot take one more foster animal, knowing I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, I don't have the financial resources, I don't have the space, right? Because if I take on one more foster dog, I'm going to become completely overwhelmed. And then how effective am I going to be? Right. And that's not fair to the animal. It's not fair to my family. It's not fair to my friends. So if I say no to one extra responsibility, it doesn't mean saying no forever. It means I can't do that right now because I need to say yes to my partner. I need to say yes to my own animal companions. I need to say yes to I need to take a couple days off and just, focus on myself, get some household chores done, things like that. Right. Again, saying no isn't forever. I just have to say no right now so I can say yes to some other things. Because we talked about this a little bit before, we can risk having our identity so wrapped up into others, we can completely lose ourselves. And so when you set boundaries, you can also start to reclaim some of who you are outside of caregiving. And so having hobbies and interest outside of caregiving can be really important too, right? I mean, I love to do pretty much everything with at least one of my animals with me at all times. But it is important for me to say, you know what? So, for example, I live 5 minutes from a lake. I have a jet ski dock there. I need to go take an hour and just be by myself, no responsibilities, and recharge. And it does, it kind of resets me. It's like a computer who's just really slowing down. I need to go kind of clean up the computer, erase
Yeah.
some files and reset. And then I'm running faster and more efficient, right? So, and that depends on kind of what recharges you, what relaxes you. The other really, really important thing is support, especially with burnout. So this has been one of the most kind of effective protective measures, if you will, against burnout is support. So find people in your life who validate your experience. Now, not just people you can just vent with, right? People who just they'll listen to you without offering advice or without dismissing well, it's just a dog. No, no, those people, those are not the people that you need in your life right now. And this can look like a support group. This can look like, just other special needs dog owners, right? Just to kind of get that validation and that support. Even people that you can just check in from time to time. There are just times when I look at my husband and he says, "What's wrong?" And all I have to say is compassion fatigue. And he just holds me. He just gives me a great big hug. He doesn't talk because God knows I don't want him to talk at that point. I don't need to be fixed. I need to be held and supported and allowed to cry. So find those people. And that can look like a mental health professional who gets it, right? And so try to find some type of support, whatever that looks like for you. And then I would say, cognitive interventions are important, like changing your mindset. But if you are finding that you are really struggling with like what we call nervous system dysregulation, where you're chronically like in fight or flight, you're anxious, you're panicky, you're just you feel like you're about to just kind of explode, or you're just shut down, like you can barely function. N- Regulating your nervous system, we call this a bottom up approach to healing. It's healing the body and then working on the cognitive part. Because again, if you're dysregulated, your cognitive part, you can't reason with this. So there are a lot of different things that you can do, whether it's deep breathing exercises. Exercise is great to kind of release some of that pent up energy. Meditation, yoga, something that we call progressive muscle relaxation, doing a body scan. All these kind of body tools can be really helpful for starting to get your nervous system back online. Then you can start to heal the cognitive part, if that makes sense.
100%. 100%. And
Yeah.
as a Reiki practitioner,
There you
that's
go.
exactly the same sort of thing. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But it's also it's relevant for how we even think about our dogs. When you think about like a dog that has gone through trauma, they can't process training or anything like that in that like we have to work on supporting their nervous system. And what do we do for in certain circumstances, like say fireworks or whatever? We use things like thunder shirts that are meant to like hold the body and send that message to the nervous system that you're safe. And
Absolutely.
we need that same thing. We're mammals too. And it's a very mammalian response. This isn't
Yeah.
something you can think yourself out of.
No, and it is. It's a human response. I mean, the brain doesn't know the difference between, a saber-toothed tiger lurking around the cave and some person cutting you off in traffic, right? Our brain kind of responds the same way. And so we have to train it to say, we're not in danger right now. So I'm going to take 2 minutes and I'm going to do some deep breathing, which is going to trigger to my brain, oh, we're safe. I don't need to be in survival mode right now. because survival mode is only supposed to be engaged for like 30 seconds to a couple minutes. And a lot of us are walking around chronically engaged. We're chronically shut down. We're chronically frozen. We're chronically in fight or flight. And that just wreaks havoc. So we have to really learn to just, because the body holds trauma, the body holds stress, the body holds grief. We have to first release it from the body if we want to do any type of mental cognitive healing.
I love that. That's just hugely important. Thank you for that reminder. I'm conscious of the time and I don't want to keep you. I feel like we could just talk about this for absolutely forever, but I wanted to make sure that I was asking you, is there anything else that you feel we haven't covered today that would be helpful for listeners to know?
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot. I know there's probably a lot to digest here and a lot to process here. But I would just say, I know you're going to put my website in the show notes. I have a lot of free resources there that talk about, my specialty is people that work or volunteer with animals, but I think a lot of the stuff can apply to your listeners as well. So I have a lot of different like worksheets or assessments and quizzes, some guided meditations, things like that, that I think would be really helpful to not only educate your audience, but help them to start to kind of find some healing. You can also find my podcast there. It's called Beyond Compassion Fatigue. And it's a mixture of solo and guest episodes, including upcoming Alexia is going to be one of those guests. And so, yeah, it's just, it's all focused on mental health for people who love, care for, and want to protect animals. So I'd encourage you to just, find all the resources you can, start educating yourself, and then you can start to heal.
Oh, I love that. And you also have books. You've got so many resources there. I think that will be really helpful
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I have it's called To Save a Starfish, a compassion fatigue workbook for the animal welfare. And then I have a book called Beyond Compassion Fatigue, which is really going to do a deep dive on trauma. Literally sent that to the publisher yesterday, and it's going to be, it's scheduled for release early 2027.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, congratulations. That's
Thank
amazing and
you.
so
Thank you.
needed. So needed.
Yeah, I'm trying to create resources I wish I had 20 years ago.
100%. Well, again, I
Yeah.
think that's the other side of when we can kind of get through pain and we can see it as a gift. And again, it's not saying that we like it, but I think so many of the most impactful things come as a result of people creating what they wished that they'd had. This podcast for me is exactly that kind of a thing. So, and it's a way of repurposing pain so that it in itself does real good in the world.
Yeah, it's a way of turning it into it's how we make meaning.
Yeah.
And ultimately, as human beings, we all want to have an impact. We all want to have this life mean something.
Mm, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if this might relate to my final question for you, which is a question that I ask all guests.
Uh-oh.
And that is, you can reflect on whether this is in response to your animals or animals that you fostered or worked with or animals in general. But I typically ask what dogs have taught you about what it means to be human, but I will allow you to expand upon that. What do you feel animals, or if you want to just think about dogs, have taught you about what it means to be human?
Oh, wow. This is a tough one because I can't come up with just one example
That's all right.
of, I mean, there's been so many animals in my own life. There's been so many animals I've worked with, whether I've been able to protect and save them or whether I've lost them. And it's been animals I haven't even met. Um, for me, it's a spiritual experience. For me, it goes beyond just a human animal bond. And I don't know. I personally feel that I was put on this earth to make a difference, even if it's small, in the lives of both people and animals, especially animals. And that, for me, that's what it means to be human. If you are fortunate to be in the position to protect, to care for, I feel that there's an obligation there. Just to get a little woo woo here, I feel like I'm a very, 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 very old soul. And I just feel that, my lives have kind of just culminated into this is the mission. Now, again, I have to work on not losing myself because I have other identities. I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, but I just feel like this is my purpose. And if I can help people out there be better caregivers, make their passion sustainable so they don't leave this field, this cause, this movement, whatever you want to call it, then I've done my work.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Jen, this has just been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, your wisdom. I'm really, really grateful.
Oh, thank you, Alexia. I really appreciate you coming or letting me come on and share this. I'm a little bit passionate. I don't know if you noticed.
Just a wee bit, just a wee, and
Just a wee bit.
it's so important, and I'm really grateful for you sharing this with this
Yeah.
audience because, again, like we were saying before, I think it's easy to spot and to accept compassion fatigue as something that others experience. But
Yeah.
we can find it hard in the same way that I think it's kind of hard to ask for the help that you might need with burnout, right? It can be hard to allow ourselves to say, actually, this is my experience and I need some support. So I'm hoping that this conversation opens a bit of a door, sparks a little bit of interest, plants a seed for people to find the support that they need and to recognize that they are worthy of that support as well. So
They are
thank you.
worthy and there's nothing wrong with them. It means they care a lot.
That's a good thing.
That's a good thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me for my conversation with Jen Blough. I hope that it's been helpful. If it has been helpful, please consider sharing it with someone else that you feel would benefit from hearing about compassion fatigue. Like Jen said, she has many great resources on her website, which is beyondcompassionfatigue.com. So I highly encourage you to check them out, as well as her own podcast, Beyond Compassion Fatigue, which you can listen to wherever you stream podcasts. I've left all these links in the show notes. And remember, we'd love for you to come join us in our free Fetch First Light group on Facebook, our sanctuary where soulful dog mamas like you find clarity, confidence, and connection. I've left this link in the show notes as well. Okay, until next time.